that he could endure 6 more months. After reaching his 1-year anniversary on the front, he would receive a 2-week leave, and he'd go home to his fiancée, Wilhelmina. He longed to see her and wrote to her often. But his deep-seated will to survive wasn't solely driven by the hope of reuniting with her. It was fueled by the death of his parents, Franz and Katharina. Max's parents had perished in the sinking of the Baron Gauch, a passenger ship that sank in the northern Adriatic Sea at the onset of the war, after running into a minefield laid by the Austro-Hungarian Navy. 127 passengers and crew members died in the sinking of the ship, and his parents' bodies were never recovered. He prayed that they didn't suffer. Heartbroken, he often viewed a photograph taken of him and his parents at a piano performance in Leipzig, which he kept in his soldaten leather wallet, alongside a picture of Wilhelmina. "Do I make you proud?" he would often silently ask. "Will I be forgiven for what I'm required to do?" After closing his wallet, he would return to his duties, resolved to live another day, and another day after that. Max sipped his soup to the squelching of footsteps approaching in the muddy trench. "A disinfection unit," Jakob said, nudging Max. Max looked up. A moustached Oberleutnant stopped and directed 2 soldiers following him. One of the soldiers used a wind gauge, which was attached to a pole and raised high in the air, while the other inspected a grouping of large metal cylinders, partially buried in the base of the trench. The officer recorded notes on a clipboard. Their unit had routinely traversed the area, but the frequency of their inspections had increased over the past few days. Max and his comrades lowered their spoons. Their meal conversation faded. Otto, a stout soldier with a lantern jaw, called to the officer. "Is there anything we can do to help, sir?" "Nein," the officer said in a hoarse, bass voice. He scribbled on his paper. Otto lowered his head. Weeks ago, several thousand metal cylinders were installed along the trench lines by a special squad called the Disinfection Unit. The cylinders were buried, except for their tops, into the base of the trench, like giant iron carrots. Rubber hoses attached to the cylinder valves ran up and over the trench. At the end of the hoses were lead nozzles, which faced the enemy line. Although the handling of the cylinders was the responsibility of the disinfection unit, Max had come to the aid of a unit member who was struggling to lug a cylinder to a hole. The thigh-high canister weighed nearly 40 kilograms, Max estimated, and it appeared to contain some type of gas. Rumours about the cylinders spread through trenches, especially when a few privileged officers were speculated to have received some type of breathing apparatus used for miners. But as days and weeks passed, the soldiers, who were toiling to stay alive, paid less and less attention to the idle cylinders. The moustached officer recorded another wind reading, and then disappeared with his men down the trench. "They work hard to keep their duties a secret," said Heinrich, a wiry soldier from Cologne who loved to play cards. "Maybe the cylinders contained disinfectant for lice," Jakob said. "I don't think so," Max said. "The nozzles are pointed toward the enemy, and they're measuring the speed and direction of the wind." Jakob shrugged. "Maybe the French have worse lice than us," Otto said, grinning. A few of the men chuckled, but the jesting abruptly faded. Whatever is inside the cylinders cannot be good. Max stirred his soup, and he wished that the heavy spring rains would return, burying the cylinders and the entire Western Front under a river of mud. Jakob finished his food and turned to Max. "Do you think the farmhouse that we visited on our leave has been destroyed by shellfire?" "I don't know," Max said, surprised by his friend's inquiry. "On our next day off," Otto said, "we need to go there, assuming it's still standing." "Ja," Heinrich said, wiggling his fingers. "Max plays the piano beautifully." Max smiled. 3 weeks earlier, Max's unit had been given a 24-hour leave. Heinrich, who had won several bottles of schnapps in a card game with a neighbouring trench unit, suggested that they find a secluded spot to drink his winnings. They settled on a vacant